Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and everybody in between, welcome to another episode of the Chaps Chat Cats, a part of the Hoops Crew Media Network. Mine is Jake, and I'm joined by the one and only Sambo. How are you?
Yeah. not too bad. A little flat. But yeah, pretty good. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Still in COVID isolation, and I'm really glad that I got to watch all 2.5 hours of my football team getting their pants smacked last night. It was good stuff. That's what we're talking about on the show tonight. Cats v Suns round 10 recap. Gonna dive into all our thoughts and the angles around what was a tough game for the Cats up in Darwin. A lot of reasons why it was tough. And we'll, of course, get into all of those. Before we jump in, just a quick shout out to our network sponsor, Valhalla Brewing, who are our media network supporters. So if you would like to check out the brew hall in North Geelong, the tap room in the CBD, make sure you do it. Valhalla Brewing, we're very happy to have them on board as our network sponsor. And Sambo, the other people we have to say a big thank you to are our Hoops Crew Patreon subscribers. Later in the show, we're going to be doing a Patreon exclusive section, the Patreon player focus, Young Cats Chats. We're going to have a look. Normally we isolate one player, talk about their performance. Instead, we're going to have a chat a bit more broadly about the season so far of your Shannon Neals, Jai Clarks, Ollie Dempsey's, etc. Some of those players who have either just debuted or have sort of semi-locked down a spot in this Cats team. So we'll chat all about them. And if you want to get that part of the show, jump on over, start your 7-day free trial on the Hoops Crew Patreon channel. You also get VFL men's and women's coverage. I've just recorded 40-minute recap of Geelong's win over Coburg. Jai Clark played a magnificent 4 quarters after the half he played up in Darwin. You get exclusive Wednesday news wraps, extended versions of our pods, behind the play interview episodes, early access episodes there from Paul. So go on over, check out a 7-day free trial on the Patreon. Enough of that though, Sambo. We want to get into round 10. I don't know if we want to, but we've got to. The Cats melted by Slick Suns in Darwin. I love trying to come up with different ways of presenting the old headlines there. And we're going to start just quickly recapping this match here for you. The Cats, it was an even sort of first quarter, sort of deceiving how this game began. Lukosius scored for the Suns after just a minute. The Cats responded through Tyson Stengel a few minutes later. The Suns had another one on the board through Lukosius again after 8.5 minutes. And it was Brian Myers who answered for the Cats on the stroke of 10 minutes played. Zach Tui put Geelong in front after 15.75 minutes, but then the Suns went bang, bang through Sam Day and Lukosius. But as has often been the case this season, the Cats went bang through Shannon Neal and added another one through Ollie Henry to take a 5 straight 30-4, 3-27 lead at the first change. Now, the Suns might have gained the lead shortly into the second quarter, but they lost the lead when Tanner Bruin scored after nearly 6 minutes played. And at that point, I thought, thank you. We're seesawing here, haven't played our best footy, but maybe we'll settle, and gain some control. We've got a slim lead. We've done pretty well here. However, as you can see by the score worm, that was the last time Geelong held the lead. That was the last time Geelong were really close in this game, as once the Suns gained the lead through a Bailey Humphrey goal, well, they just piled on Sambo, they took a halftime 11-5-71 to 6-2-38 lead at the main break, and they did not stop. 8 goals in the third quarter to Geelong's 2 to take a 19-7-121 to 8-7-55 lead. They added another 7 goals, 1 to Geelong's 7 goals, 3. Geelong actually won the last quarter. Some
Yeah.
somewhat unrepresented fact.
If it was another team,
Um,
we'd call that junk time, but because it was us, we know that
that's right.
had the game been a little longer, we were on the comeback. That was the
That's right.
real
That's right.
time. The first 3 quarters were junk time.
Champagne time.
That's right. After dinner mint. After dinner mint and some whiskey time, I think.
That's right. Unroll the cigar and kick some wine time goals.
That's right.
Yeah, no, the Cats ultimately falling 26-8, 164 to 15-10, 100. Sambo, if you told me going into this game that the Cats would emerge having kicked 15-10, 100 up in Darwin, I would have said, sweet, maybe like a 2-3 goal win, maybe more. What were your thoughts on this one? Because once it went wrong, it went really wrong.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that. That was kind of my my leading statement, really. This is we gotta.
No, you're good. I shouldn't have checked that. I shouldn't have
shouldn't.
checked the private chat because you've sent some suggestions
Yeah,
for future show headlines.
yeah. If you
Don't
ever
think I
if you
can
ever want
repeat
me to
them
do any
here.
work on the headlines or the thumb, just let me know, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Um,
Write some bylines.
you shouldn't have read it. Some would say I shouldn't have sent it, but it's far too late for that.
It's fine.
Yeah, like I that was my exact thoughts really at the end of the game was like that's a good score against the against the Suns in Darwin, like without
Mm.
Hawkins, Cameron, Dangerfield, Santa Coning out, like I'd go, whoo, yeah,
Mm.
cool. I imagine the Suns maybe kicking, if you cover the other half, I reckon the Suns maybe kicked 78, 82. I think I think we were
Mm.
kicked away from them in the last quarter, which we did. It just unfortunately, the summit that we'd left for ourselves. Um, yeah, look, I'm glad we're not recording it the day of, not because I was like doom and gloom and sack the coach or any of that. I was very flat. I was a little bit like, ugh, that's which
Oh,
which
yeah.
and just gonna roll out the positives. One of the big positives here is this doesn't happen very often. That's a positive. We haven't had to deal with this. Like this is the biggest score, almost. This is the second biggest score in like that we've conceded in my lifetime. So the biggest score,
Well,
the biggest score against us since. Did they say 94?
1999.
99,
I
okay,
think
no, I thought 24,
99.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
just on that, I suddenly went, I didn't really start watching footy until about 2001. So
No,
I
it's definitely
it's totally new territory for me.
the biggest I've ever seen. There's another headline for us. Um, but, uh but again, like, the score again, like, that we got is kind of still okay, so it's just bizarre, like, our mate
Yeah.
Jacko messaged me, and he's like, "I don't really know what to think from that scoreline." Like, I don't think he'd watched any of the game. He was just like, What's that about?" Like, what a weird,
Yeah.
just not in terms of the Cats, but just in terms of a football game. 100 to 100
Mm.
and 164. But anyway, my positive being that it doesn't happen very often. It's, and it does make me think of, fans of teams like Hawthorn, who have had a bit of a struggle. Teams like North Melbourne, like, there's other teams that it did feel a little bit like a
The
glimpse
Gold
to the
Coast.
other side of the tracks, going, oh yeah, this is how life could be. But yeah, it was I can't remember the other positive. I did have another positive to spin on it. I can't remember. Hopefully, it comes back to me at some point.
Spread them out
Um,
if you've only got 2, like,
yeah,
let's
true, true. I'll
ration them
save it.
across the show.
I'll save it. But that is like the just how much of a dour kind of note it was, and how unusual it felt is kind of a good feeling. You know, what I mean, I'd rather that feeling than this again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that would be a worse scenario. And the other positive, I guess, is that that slight little bit of like ego hit you get from being somewhat right. Because as we always skew positive on the podcast, but you had been saying for probably since round one that this was the game that you thought we would drop. And I said on the podcast, although we skew positive and I think we could and should have
Yeah.
won, I did say this is I just distinctly had I think I said the shadow or the specter of Gold Coast last year. Hang on, because that game, very different scoreline and such, but that game was a similar one last year where
Sure.
it's like we only just lost to Collingwood. We only just lost all these people. And then that game was
Mm.
really yuck. I remember just going,
Yeah.
I just didn't want to watch that at
What are
all.
we
I
doing?
want, I want my time back. And that's kind of what this game felt like as well. It was just sort of like, yeah. Shoot ourselves in the foot here because we've got to now record a podcast about it. But part of me just wants to go. It's like it hardly feels worth analyzing. And I actually there's
Mm.
mm, in one of the media talking heads shows there was one of the presenters who said that they were talking about how harsh the review of the Cats will be up, and he was kind of like, and he's someone who sometimes I think's on it and sometimes not on it. So I'm not saying this is true, but it's just interesting because his opinion was he goes, I kind of feel like they should just put a line through it and move on. Like that was so out of character and so
Mm.
bad. It's almost like focusing on it could be worse. He's kind of like if you
Mm.
did that 6 weeks in a row, you're like, oh god. But he was like, maybe just put a line through it, put it in the bin, and move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And like it's a weird game. I mean, footy's a weird game. It's so funny, 160 whatever, 164 to 100. People constantly, we haven't. I don't think we've had a score like that since the 80s or so. I can't remember. There was some stat about this is. There was something to do with scores from the 90s or 80s, and people pine for that time where both teams cleared 100. It was a pretty crap game of footy, I thought. Like, and of course, I would say that as a Cat supporter, but I thought that
Well, the Melbourne game
we were
wasn't though. The
very,
Melbourne game was a good game of football, and we
and,
lost.
and
I'm
yet
just
people would naysay you about that.
mm,
People
yeah,
hated that game
true.
stylistically, but I really enjoyed the Melbourne game. To me, this game lacked so much for me, the finesse, particularly on our part. If
Mm,
any team had clean skills or added some finesse, it was the Gold Coast in this game. But it was not particularly pleasing to the eye, particularly a lot of what we did. But just in general, there's a lot of bang it long footy, I thought, and I
yeah,
just don't. I'm just not really into it personally,
no,
and that is how you play the conditions. But I'm glad we don't get those conditions all the time because I think it makes for a fairly one-dimensional product. But having said that, I'm interested to sort of dive into some of the specifics here. I'll bring some of the stats up because I sort of thought that it's worth having a look at some of these. Um,
yeah,
Obviously, Gold Coast on the left and the Cats on the right. They beat us 436 to 354 in terms of total disposals. Now it's well up on their season average, but it's also slightly up on our season average, which is kind of funny. Inside 50s, they had 73 to 56. Now, bear in mind, that's well up on their season average, but it's pretty close to our season average. We're actually above our season average for inside
yeah. But
50s.
we kicked a decent score.
Despite,
Like it,
yeah,
it makes 7 what is 73 against us. That's got to be. Is that the most inside 50s we've conceded this year?
it would have to be. I can't think. Maybe Carlton might have pumped it in a few times.
Yeah, I don't think that
Maybe.
many though. I don't think that
Um,
many.
Disposal efficiency. We're actually more efficient inside 50 in terms of creating scores per inside 50. But when you've got 73 to 56, they're going to create a lot more. Disposal efficiency, they were 10% better than us, 77 to 67. And you would have definitely thought that. We won't talk about the free kicks, just aside from saying that the Cats AFL men's and VFL men's teams lost the free kick count this week, I believe, 26 to 54.
I would say quickly on the
Cats.
on the free kicks, like I thought Scott
Oh yeah.
was quite gracious in the presser. I don't know if it's
Oh, I
because
haven't watched.
he waded into it last week and there was a bit of hate about it, and so maybe he just thought he shouldn't. But there was certainly they tried to get him to say something again, and he kind of went, you know, when you're up against it and you're under that much pressure, you know, it's young players can put a hand where they shouldn't, or he said he said that's a kind of it can be a run on effect from being on that. So I thought he stepped around it quite, and I think he's probably onto something. Like again, we're not gonna get into it, but like I'm sure part of that
Definitely.
freak, like as much as I'd love to sit here and say 100% of their free kicks were absolutely outrageous, I'm sure there's some percentage of them that was absolutely our fault, and we were just like compiling these kind of elements against ourselves.
Definitely. And I thought there was a bunch that were missed. And not just for us, but for them too. There are a few times
Oh
where I was
yeah.
like, oh God, there's another, but it just play went on. So I don't I really think that, we can just we can put this one away by just saying Chris Scott hit the nail on the head last week. Every one of his comments about the umpiring was absolutely spot on. An incredibly hard job. You're going to have to accept that mistakes are made. And some of the rules are very hard to officiate and very hard to play within. You
Mm,
saw last night another goal given away because a player was worried about taking another player to ground in a tackle.
mhm.
That player subsequently was able to spin out of the tackle, move the ball on, and I think it was Carlton went on and got a goal, or Sydney. And it's exactly what Scott was talking about, Collar Jasny tackling
Yeah,
the
yeah.
Carlton forward, the Carlton player inside 50, where he was worried about taking him to ground, didn't, and so the player's able to stand up, drop the ball, and kick the goal. So everything Chris Scott said last week was absolutely on point. If you think he's enough, it's probably because you are enough yourself and support Richmond or Collingwood and just think he's here for a whinge. His comments were absolutely spot on, and it would be better for the league if they did have a look at it. Having said all that, you hit the nail on the head as far as this game. I don't really think that the free kicks played a lot into it, apart
No.
from blindingly frustrating us at home. It was just a compounding of what we were already watching. The
Yeah.
Cats, ironically, actually win the clearances in this game. Um, they won the contested possession by a couple, 158 to 156. Again, plus 24 on our season average for contested possessions. Got absolutely obliterated in uncontested possessions. The turnovers, bizarrely, were 77 to 76, but the marks 92 to 49 the Suns' way. Now, I know we're marking the ball less outside of intercepting situations this year than maybe some seasons
Not that
gone
much
by,
left.
and that's why
Not that much
no,
left.
not that much less. And Sambo, just 5 marks inside 50 for the Cats. Tackling, we had 57, which was down on our season average. Suns up to 71. I wanted to just put to you the thought that there was a lot of criticism on Twitter about the midfield, the midfield. Oh, the midfield's as bad as it's ever been, blah, blah, blah. My personal thoughts on the midfield were we actually competed really, really well at the stoppages, at clearances. We actually won a lot of first use. It was everything that happened outside of the contest where the
Mm.
Cats really let themselves down. I thought there was a pretty massive difference in marking and kicking skills in the conditions. Did you that sort of match up with what you thought? What were your thoughts on the midfield?
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, like, sometimes you just go, "I don't know how this relates to, like, what I'm seeing," and this specifically is the disposal efficiency. Because what I would say is that, yeah, I thought we competed really well, like, at the ground and, the hit outs. What was the hit out, differential in the end?
I think we lost by
Um
7, 46 to
Yeah, like,
39 or something.
I thought our, yes, yep. Yeah, here it is. Yeah, I thought our hit outs were alright. I thought our contest around it was okay. Um, I definitely didn't think it's as bad as it's ever been, or the worst it's been, um, or anything. I think it just felt like those skill errors, like disposing of the, and maybe this is where that whole disposal efficiency thing can be a bit misleading, because if you hand pass it and the player you're hand passing it to gets the ball, I'm assuming that's an effective disposal. But there's a whole range
Mm.
of scenarios within that, as in you can pass it to the player that you really shouldn't have passed it to because they're under pressure, or you can hand pass it
Yeah.
to a player and it's just beyond them or just behind them, so they do take possession of it, but it's not within stride. They have to, because that the hand pass, the overcooked hand pass or the undercooked hand pass that would just go, max home. Someone is running through,
Mm.
and they kind of have to like lean back and like take a little skip step to get into the flight of the ball to pick it up. That's probably not an ineffective disposal stat wise, but as far as moving the ball out of contest, it is. It's not.
Yes.
It's ineffective because you're giving it to someone who's in disadvantageous position, or you're giving it to them in such a way that you're selling them into trouble. And that just seemed to happen a lot to me. So no, I didn't think the actual contest was bad. I thought their structure around the contest was better than ours. Like, and this is something that mirrored the Port game, where you're going. It feels like luck. It feels like fate is just kind of like, we've got three
Mm.
players in there, they've got three players in there, and we're all hands down on the ground, all scrabbling for it after a ball up, and it just kind of bobbles out over someone's foot out of that
Mm.
pack, and every single time it was a Suns player there. Just like every single
Yeah.
time it was a Port player there. Um, and it feels like luck. It feels like really bad luck, but it probably is either experience and reading the ball better, reading the pack better, or it's just structure, and the way they were able to structure up around it was just far outweighed ours, and we just kept getting that would happen, and then it would go to one of their players, and our players are on the wrong side of the contest. We were moving up, getting ready to attack or whatever, and now they've got it at the back and they're sort of away with a bit of space. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, as like, I don't know if that really answers what you were talking about specifically, but I thought we acquitted ourselves effectively in the actual midfield, like the
Mm.
contests and the sort of crumbing and that around the middle. It's just
Mm.
that everything after that point, we just kind of fell apart. If they won it, I felt like our structure was not set up effectively, and if we won it, I don't think that's disposal. So we won the possession, but that disposal was never super effective, or just like really on the money. And then our inside
Mm.
50s, again, the inside 50 um efficiency is not bad. It's like only down
Yeah.
0.1% on our season average, supposedly. But
Mm.
again, I don't really know what they're reading that with. And if we've yeah, if we only had if we had 56 inside 50s and only 5
Mm.
marked inside 50, I'm not really sure how
Mm.
much, like, how much they take, what specifically counts to an effective. Is it just a score? Is that when it results in a score, it's an effective inside 50?
I think so. I think that 48% is saying you had a score on 48% of your
Yeah.
entries or something like that, because I think that
Which is
roughly.
also the other thing that makes this tough is it'd be really interesting to analyze this game from the 3 quarters, just the first 3 quarters, because I think we've padded a
Yes.
lot of our stats with that little push
Yeah.
we made. Like, we were able to get some of those goals at the end. And that's sort of, because I think, and to be fair, in the first quarter, our inside 50 efficiency was incredibly high as far as goals
Yeah.
per inside 50. It was like they did
Mm.
seem to have a slight bit of ascendancy and a little bit of momentum, but we were able to keep up with them.
Mm.
And then in the second quarter, I think it was sort of
Careful.
and we were able to push our noses in front. There was 5 lead changes within the first 2 quarters.
Mm.
Crazy to like think there's 5 lead changes in a game that we
I know.
lost by 60 odd points. Um, so I think we were just managing to be really efficient, but um, I don't know. I've waffled on again, but I think there's a few things like that. There's sort of three stats that add up to really paint a picture of just what it felt like watching it, and that would be the uncontested possessions, combined with the marks, combined with the tackles.
Yeah.
Like I think
Yeah.
they had the fact that we got so few tackles and they had so many uncontested possessions, it just proves that we just weren't tackling enough. And they were able to just kick it around and mark it just unbelievably well. I mean, they were up almost 10 on their season average marks, and we were down
Mm.
like 30 on our
Yeah.
our season average marks. We might as well have been about half really. And obviously the marks inside
Mm.
50, the contested marks is horrid. But yeah, I think those three stats, it really does. It was that, like you said, Jake, it was kind of like this long bang it forward, and it felt like chaos. But their disposal felt chaotic, but the way they were able to gain possession of it was not chaotic at all.
Mm.
Like, that was
No.
like, they were doing these big floater, kinda like mongrelly kicks, like, not a torp, not a drop punt, they were like, and they
Mm.
just it would pick some player out
Plucker.
amongst 3 cats. There's 3 cats there, and it just lands on the head of the Suns player. So I think, as
Mm.
much as, yeah, I agree, it was not a nice looking game of football. I think the credit to them in how they were able to, like, maintain possession during chaotic disposal is kind of mind blowing. And I actually saw someone online who was like they went a Collingwood fan here, and they said no Victorian club was going to win that game. They're like, that was a freak of nature the
Mm.
way the Suns play. They're like, I really don't think any Victorian club could travel up there. And I don't want to use, just like I didn't want to use the free kicks. I don't want to use the
Mm.
conditions either. But it was just one of those times when you're like, it was just it was a little bit of a band-aid on the boo boo to hear another fan go, it's all right, we would have lost too. Um, but I think it does show too. Sorry, you've probably got something to throw to, and I'm just rambling.
No, you're
But I
good.
think I think the other thing it probably does, hopefully, throw up to people is without Hawkins. This is even without Hawkins when he's off his game. A Hawkins that kicks 0 goals. This is the effect that he has on our forward line, which is when you're left with Ollie Henry, Neil, and Gary Rowan, they can defend in such a way that it takes the efficacy away from Ollie Henry,
Mm.
Lockie Neal. Oh my god, did I say Lockie Neal twice? Shannon Neal.
I hope not.
God. Maybe I'm getting COVID. Let's blame that. Um, and Gary Rowan, like those players, Ollie Henry and Gary Rowan, and Tyson Stengel as well. Those players are able to operate, and this is what we've said before. But they're able to operate the way they operate because Hawkins is in the side, and even when he only kicks 1 goal, 0 goals,
Mm.
he's such a man mountain, both physically and in reputation, that it forces
Yeah.
oppositions to respond in a particular way. Whereas last night, it felt like they could defend however they wanted. They could put whoever they wanted, and they had pretty good matchups. Someone goes and has a rest, and they go, okay, he can go and match up on Ollie Henry now. There wasn't this sense of this one player out there for
Mm.
100% of the game time because he's the only one who could possibly go on that player and take care of Tom Hawkins.
Yeah.
And it really did feel. I don't know that our disposal into the 50 was ever like that dangerous anyway, but it did always feel a bit like, and I don't mean this in a really negative or like insulting way, but just watching it felt a little bit like when you're watching the Oz kick at halftime and someone does a big kick into their forward arc and then you go, well, no one's gonna mark it. Like it's the Oz kick. Like they've skied it, and
Yeah.
there's all these little 7-year-olds like in a pack. And that's
Yeah.
that's what it felt like when it went inside our 50. You're kind of like, well, no one's gonna mark it, but it might fall out the back and
Yeah.
someone picks it up. Like yeah,
Yeah.
and we love Ollie Henry, Stengel. I love Gary Rowan. I really hope he was gonna have a big night, but it does just make you go, without Cameron and without Hawkins, but particularly without Hawkins, this is kind of what teams are able to do to us in the back line. Uh, which is another, like, the outs. I don't really want to bitch about the outs either, because I think I still stand by the plan, the management, and all that.
Mm.
But there were some big outs.
And yeah, it's funny because people have been saying for us, get Shannon Neal in, get this player in that. And it's not a knock against Shannon Neal, but it's saying like there's a reason why certain guys are picked all the time. There's a reason why Tom Hawkins is going to break the all-time games record for Geelong this next weekend against GWS. There's a reason. And it makes a difference whether it's him wearing the hooped Guernsey or if it's Neil. And I just think that, you know, it's just funny because to me, Geelong currently, it's like saying Carlton without Cripps, Curnow, or Mackay. There's no Dangerfield, who for better or worse is still currently the most impactful midfielder.
Mm-hmm.
There's no Hawkins and there's no Cameron, who are the two best big forwards. So it's funny that it is a fantastic win for the Gold Coast. No bones about it. But people saying, oh, it's historic, to defeat this great Geelong team. I couldn't help but be reminded of when the Western Bulldogs beat us down at Cardinia Park last year and it felt like we were playing the twos. Now, there's not that many of the kids out there, but there were shades of it for me. Now, having said that, we woefully adapted to the conditions and did not represent ourselves very well at all. And there's a couple of numbers that really stand out to me, and that's some disposal efficiencies from some players who are normally our leaders in this field. Now, you had 92.9 for Brad Close, 92.3% for O'Sheen Mullen, 90.9% for Tanner Bruin, and 88.9% for Blix Harves. You had Jack Henry, Zach Tui, and Zach Guthrie all clear 84%. Then you scroll a long way down. And you find Tom Stewart, 61.9% disposal efficiency. Jake Kolodjasny, 56.3%. They were down. Tom Stewart was down by 18% on his disposal efficiency, and Jake Kolodjasny was down best part of 20%. And if you look at their kicking efficiency in this game as opposed to the last game, and I'm not trying to single these guys out to say they were the problem. I'm singling these guys out because they're some of the most glaring differences from what they normally do to this. Tom Stewart went at 45% by foot. That's down 36% on his season average. And Jake Kolodjasny, who goes at 75% normally, went at 55%. Like, they weren't the only ones, but they are some of the most glaring examples of guys who normally kick and mark brilliantly. I would struggle to find a game where they have used the ball worse. And Tom Stewart, by my count, was the first game in his career where he played all four quarters and didn't take a single mark.
Yeah, he's correct. Yeah, I think
Nuts.
Yeah, and it's honestly because I think it was Melbourne, the first team to do it. This this tagging, like, they're gonna have to maybe figure out a way to help Tom Stewart out, whether it's moving him around the ground or what. But it's one of those things, and I don't want to be the, like, I'm not complaining necessarily or saying it's wrong, but there is this kind of like this dark art of it, of like some of the things they get away with off the ball, keeping not no one's punching anyone or anything like that. I'm not saying that they're suspendable offenses or anything like that. But there is this, and we've seen it before. With other teams and other gun defenders, where they just kind of just niggled out of it, and that just gets in their head. It's physically debilitating and also psychologically debilitating. And we saw it work pretty well last week to move Stewart onto the wing and then move him back. I don't know if he lost his tag at that point or if they went, oh well, if he's going to move to the wing, we won't do it. But he definitely became more effective in the back half against Port. In Tom Stewart's defense, like I don't think he had a terrible game. Like a lot of people are like, there's video like articles that are like, has Tom Stewart been exposed? And basically like, was he a fraud all along? Has he always been a shite player and we just didn't realize? By footballers' standards, he still had a pretty good game. Like he was not terrible. He had 21 disposals and um
Mm.
that's
Led the
great.
game for intercept possessions.
Yeah. There's a lot of stuff, and so it's not necessarily even. I guess the tagging is a big part of it, but also whenever any of our players got to it, we were not marking anywhere near as well as we should have been, and maybe that's conditions, maybe that's psychology, maybe there's something else going on. Because I thought last week was the same. I thought at Cardinia Park we weren't marking that well, so pretty sure it wasn't Darwin heat down at Cardinia Park.
Mm.
But yeah, like there's a few things. Like one of the things I'd like to say, just talking about the management thing, is a lot of the other thing I've seen is maybe this people saying it was a bit arrogant to rest Hawkins and Duncan, etc. That like we didn't give the opposition the respect, and I almost wonder if it's the opposite. Not that I think we threw the game, but we always knew this was going to be a bit of a mare going up to Darwin
Mm.
at this point in the season and sticking with that management, like even when Cameron went down and Sam DeConey went down, like I don't think it was a hey, we can send our B squad and beat them. I think it was more a case of giving our best players the best chance to have the most impact in the most important games. Like
Mm.
I would say that I don't think this was a super important game for our season. It sucks to have lost 3 in a row. That's really brutal, but it's still early in the season. We've still won 7 in a row.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of good signs, and presumably a lot of these issues are fixable. The issues that actually
Mm.
exist, and a lot of the issues are isolated, I think, to this particular game, to the team we played, where we played them, the team that we fielded, etc. So it's almost like, as I said, I don't think we were throwing it, but I certainly think there was this air of, you know, the potential to burn out some players to suddenly go, actually, no, you can't have a week off, Hawkins. You've got to go to Darwin and play in horrendous conditions. Like, yeah, I still respect the way they're going about it. But Jack Bowes is an interesting one. Just a kind of about face, and because meters gained is such a weird, because that's a stat I love to look at, the meters gained, and I think
Mm.
meters gained is really important for our team and the way we have
Mm.
chosen to play this year. Meters gained via foot, like running, and also
Mm.
via kicks is super important. But Jack Bowes is our second highest. So he has 624 meters gained, which is pretty, like that
Mm.
looks great. But then his kicking efficiency is 28%. Sorry, his
Mm.
disposal efficiency is 28%. He's the team low, 28.6% disposal efficiency. And that's where the meters gain stat starts to bug me a little bit, because I go, well, does that mean you just kicked it really long and then a Suns
Yes.
player marked it? Like, is that really meters gained? Like, it's got to, and I think we've said this
Yeah.
before, it'd be really good to have a stat that was effective meters gained, which is you've run with the ball or you've disposed of
Mm.
it and it went to one of your players. Because if you've traveled the ball 600, nearly 624
30
meters,
meters per disposal.
yeah, but it's 28%. Um,
Mm.
yeah, like that's kind of not concerning or anything, but it is why, because I didn't think he had a great night, but then I looked at it and went, 21 disposals and 624 meters gained, like that's
Mm.
great. But then when you sort of back it up with the disposal efficiency, you kind of go, okay, I guess that's sort of why it felt the way it did. But um, yeah, I don't know if there's more points that you'd made in there that I didn't didn't sort of touch on or anything else you wanted to throw to, but Jack Bowes was just the one that stood out, not hanging it on him and saying, "This is the reason we lost."
Mm.
But it's just another element of a really bad, weird game.
Yeah, and it's sort of like it's weird because you look at like stats are just interesting. Like Brian Myers and Max Holmes led us with 7 each in terms of turnovers.
Mm,
Um, Now Bose had eight clangers, Rowan 7, Neil 7, Myers 7, Parfitt 6. They were our top 5. And you think about Rowan and Neil combining for 14 clangers, and they're two players who are inside your forward 50. Like
what's a clanger though? Because
it's
I wouldn't
rough.
say
I
I don't.
thought
Is that like a dropped mark? Does a dropped mark count as a clanger? I'm just trying to think of any
I think
clangers
it's
that I saw either of them get.
mm. Well, do you know one of the things that stood out to me is a great example of how things can go badly for you and maybe people will forget it and not read it as how it went. One of them was we did a beautiful move up the ground. Gary Rowan finds Shannon Neal inside the forward 50 with a beautiful piercing
Mm,
kick. Shannon Neal drops the mark. Gold Coast pounce on it, sweep up the other end and score. And
yeah.
what everyone will remember is, oh, we can't defend. What's wrong with our backline? They just no one sees the simple thing, which is if we take a mark there inside forward 50, you get a shot. If you can at least bring it to ground and fight for it and lock it in there, you lock it in, allowing your backline to set up, allowing your whole defensive structure to set up. And instead, it's dropped, they swoop, they go, and they score. And I feel like there was a lot of stuff like that early against Port Adelaide, where the backline copped it for what was really maybe a forward line problem. And that
Yeah.
is a problem when you can't execute the basic skills. To take a mark like that, you could not have set it up any better.
Mm,
And that's not like it doesn't have to be a long term indictment on Shannon Neal. But
no.
again, this is this is the fine margins on which a top level side exists.
Yeah. And he's still so young. Like these are things that you wouldn't have been shocked to see. Um, you know, Jamara doing for the Dogs 2 years ago.
Yeah,
Or
yeah,
the King brothers kind of still sometimes like they're still they're still young and they're still they're still not super
mm,
consistent all the time. Or even like the young Mackay, like big big young guys that go into the forward line. Like it's such a head game to do that, and you get thrown up there largely because of the height that you've got at a certain point, and then you just kind of have to not only fill out physically, but fill the role because you've been given that role because of your
mm,
physical attributes, and it's like, well, you fit that the best, so you now have to. It doesn't even necessarily mean you've got a like a an inbuilt um like aptitude for it. It just it's the way you were born sometimes, and that's I still think Neil will be really good. He has really good signs. The goal he kicked under pressure because from the set shot without much like he didn't take a lot of the clock because he wanted to kick it quickly. I was pretty impressed with that. That was not the hardest kick in the world, of
mm,
course, but just for him to back himself and when you're up against it, and that's the kind of kick you can absolutely imagine a young guy missing because we're up against it and we really need some goals. And he, backed himself and
mm.
went back and slotted it. Like, um, yeah, I think it's just still a matter of time, and I think people wanting to slot in and just be like Hawkins was 10 years ago. And it's just not going to happen. Like it's just not the reality. He needs
Mm.
time to build to that. Um, but yeah, and you know what? Neil in there with Hawkins, Neil in there with Cameron, um, might have a better crack at it.
And I think too, people, I don't know, it was Twitter was a bit of a difficult place to exist on, and I understand
Glad I'm
everyone
not on
needs to
it.
vent, but like I don't know, I just after halftime, or I think I said to you, early on in the third term, I was like, all right, cool. I'm emotionally checking out here, and I'm just going to analyze who plays out the game hard, who executes their skills well, and so to go and score 7 goals, 3 in champagne time, not junk time, champagne
Yeah,
time,
absolutely.
was nice. But I don't, I really don't think it's a massive, like, there's a lot of this, like, who have we got to put in? Who have we got to put in? We've got to overhaul the roster. That
No,
midfield, blow them up. I've seen
no.
so many people saying it's time to drop Atkins, Parfitt, and Clark. Can't have any of those guys. Got to drop O'Connor as well. Apparently, all these guys have to come out. They're no good. It's time, and I just really am glad that it's the coaches in charge of the team and not fans,
Yeah,
because look at the track record of fan groups. The calls that have been made. Zach Guthrie wouldn't be there.
Grind
We
Myers.
probably wouldn't have made the trade for Jezza. Yeah, Grind would have been cut. I just think that just be patient. I think really, I don't think it's a massive. I don't think we're massive steps away. It was a pretty awful night,
It was. I mean, because
and
it's
ultimately,
not. Sorry, you finish.
I just think I don't think it's not rocket science to work out what the turnaround is. We didn't
Mm,
execute very well in some key areas of the game, and you got smacked by a team that probably played the best game it's played in the history of its club.
yeah, yeah, and I think like it's because it's if it was just those players they mentioned that had off nights and that was consistently having off nights, um, you talk about, but is anyone suggesting we drop Mark Blixarves? Like, he had a pretty he had a pretty off night. Like, if you look at his stats,
Yep.
I don't know when the last time he had that, that low, disposals
Mm,
or, tackles as well. Actually, yeah, sorry, 3 tackles. Like, he's normally someone that you can rely on for tackles and marks. He
mm,
took 3 of both. Played 90% of the game for 9 disposals. Um, like that's an off night for Blixarps when as far as I know, he wasn't playing any kind of like tagging or blanketing role. And he wasn't
mm.
wasn't called into the ruck much. He had a little bit of a stint there where I thought maybe Conway was injured because Conway hadn't gone on, but I think Neil actually did a lot of that rucking in that period. Um, so yeah, like it's no one wants to drop Tom Stewart or Blixarves. These guys had offish nights. Okay. So I think it's just
Yeah.
yeah, people overreact and they want cookie cutter building block kind of fix. You take that person out, you chuck that person in, and like it's it's done. But it's not that simple. But at the same time, it's not as hard as that either because dropping all those key players and starting again would be incredibly
Mm.
complex and time consuming and daunting of a task. Whereas I think it's it's a lot. I think at the end of the day, it's a lot closer than it feels. Um, and it puts us off people's radar a little bit too, which I also like. I like not being the top dog because it did have that
Off the
sense of it.
radar, we're cooked, mate.
Yeah. It did have that sense prior to these few losses that Geelong was starting to become a real
Mm.
target of how do we figure them out? Um, uh, sorry, I was just checking my. It's just John. It's just John, but that's all right.
Oh,
I was making sure it wasn't Lauren. Um, I think I think the tackles like we should get going on 50 minutes here, just kind of crying
yeah.
about stuff. But the tackle count is the one that's a real bummer, and I think it all comes back to my favorite word, which is structure. I think the midfield, as I said, the midfields they outstructured us, and it was pinging back in so quickly because we didn't have Hawkins and Cameron up there to grab it. We didn't have a weight of inside 50s. We weren't terrible. We didn't have a weight of inside 50s just to
Mm.
push on them. And it was pinging out there so long, high, and fast that we didn't, the one thing I wanted to see before the game when we did our preview was that whole, I wanted to see them stagnant. I want them to be starved for
Yeah.
options when trying to turn over there. That didn't happen once. Not literally, not once did they have to take a moment to think about where they're going from their back, from their back 50.
Yep.
Um, and we just looked off it, like physically, like we were off our man a lot. And this is, you know, God, I really don't want to keep mentioning the conditions, but sans any real hard evidence of practical things, you've kind of just got to theorize a little bit. And so I think we do
Mm,
play off our players a bit. Like I think that is the way the Cats structure up because we want space on the turnovers. So if we're too close to our players, defensively, you're not going to have that meterage when you do turn it over and go with it. So we do hang off a little bit and
mm,
rely on being able to read the play and get to their players when we need to. And last at the end of the first quarter, we looked gassed. Like and not the old guys. It wasn't like Gary Rowan and Zach Tui only like lying on the ground. Like Jack
mm.
Bowes and Tanner Bruin walking around with hands on
Yeah,
heads and hands on hips at quarter time. Like, and
yeah.
we looked off it as in physically distance. We looked too far away from them, and we just didn't have the leg speed to close the distances when we needed to.
Mm,
And so it gave this effect of it looking like they had three times the amount of players on the field than we did because it was like it
mm.
was kicked long and it came down to six of their players and two of ours and and then you kind of go, well, look how many they've got around it. There's no way they've got options in. Oh no, they've got four options inside 50 actually. Like it's just they were just kind of everywhere, and it was just a bit of it. And it
Mm,
felt way worse than the Port game, obviously, even just for the fact that we'd started okay and they started to pile it on in the second quarter, and I went, well, you got one
mm.
less quarter to turn this around compared to the Port game, where that all happened in the
Yeah.
first quarter, and then we could build back into it. Um, so if we had three more quarters on the end of the game, we might have we might have been able
Yeah.
to work back into it. But yeah,
Le the
God,
footy in motion, it's a
yes,
killer. I was when we were watching against Port, and what you wanna see is a player take a mark and then pause and be stuck for where to go, and
mm,
Port, so much of that first half, it was just ball constantly in
mm.
motion, left and right and forward and back and moving around. Thought there was a lot of that for the Suns where we very rarely saw them stagnant, and it's
Yeah, and
so hard to defend.
the difference with Port too was as soon as we put Mullen on Horn Francis, it made so much difference. Like obviously Port have a good team. I'm not saying
Mm,
it's just him, but he was the really damaging, really hot player. And he was still able to have effect because he was so good, but we just negated enough of that to allow us breathing room.
mm.
It didn't feel that way with Gold Coast. Like they had very
No.
good players. Rao obviously had a blinder. Um, but it didn't feel like we could have just taken him out of the game and that would have done it. Like it was coming from too many areas, from too many players, from all
Mm,
different kinds of speeds and different levels of the ground. Sometimes they were coming at us from turnover, sometimes from the contest, sometimes from the square, from the clearances. Sometimes in our back 50, their pressure game
mm.
in our back line was also really good. So it just didn't feel like I'm not surprised, like it felt like first time in a long time, felt like Chris Scott didn't have any answers. And I'm not surprised because I still don't have any answers. Days later, thinking about it, I don't really know what we could have done differently to have stopped that. So you know, that's
I
depressing, but
I think
also encouraging because it does feel like a bit of an oddity.
yeah, and I know we've harped on the same point, but it's just like you're well behind the 8 ball when you can't mark the footy.
Yeah,
Like, and I'm not just talking like contested marks, but just like uncontested mark. Just
any
hold on to it. Like,
possess it,
yeah,
even when
yeah,
it's
or
not
pick the
marked, just
ball up.
possess it
Oh,
when it's
yeah,
when it's handballed to you.
you're way behind the 8 ball when that's the starting point. So, um, yeah, look, these things happen. I don't think it's any time to pull the panic button or press the panic button, pull the parachute, whatever. I'm mixing metaphors here. Let's quickly do uh some best on ground votes. I thought it was pretty easy to find two, relatively tricky to find three. I I'm giving my one vote I do need to check that I've got this correct. I think I gave my 1 vote to Max Holmes. I was a little bit surprised. Like, people, I suppose, might point to his kicking efficiency being a bit down, but I actually think on balance, it's not that far off his usual. But sort of surprised me that we didn't move him further around the ball earlier.
Mm.
I was kind of hoping that the presence of O'Sheen Mullen could help free Holmesy up a bit. Like, because O'Sheen sort of played that attacking half back kind of role when he played Gaelic football. And I know, I thought one
Maybe,
or the other, put him in the middle or put
maybe
Holmes.
with Mullen and Duncan in the game, maybe then you can
Yes,
push
Duncan we
Holmes up.
missed. Yeah, definitely agree with that. So O'Sheen had one of the prettiest kicks you'll ever see that
Mm.
I think resulted in a behind because I can't remember if we couldn't take a mark or so. It was just a special kick. But
Yeah.
anyway, 1 vote to Max Holmes, wore the socks up, had 32 touches. I thought he represented himself pretty well, and I'm so glad. That was one thought. I thought, thank God he's signed
Mm.
for a long time. Tyson Stengel, I gave 2 votes. I thought he was really, really good yet again. Kicked a banger of a goal off the deck to open uh, the game up for us early. Kicked 3 straight for the night. I think, I don't know, he's such a good player. Speaking of signing players, let's get him signed as quickly as possible. But my 3 votes actually go to Brian Myers. Thought he had a really quiet start, but once he warmed into the game, I thought he was pretty special. Again, 29 touches, uh, 20 of them by foot, 2 goals, had a goal assist, 3 clearances, 3 tackles, nearly 600 meters gained. And I think when you look at the pressure stats, as I try and click for this, there we are, pressure act. No, he was nowhere near it. So I thought he had a heap of pressure acts, but apparently not. I had 14. He had 14. It's about middle of the pack for us. But anyway, he was best on for me out of ours across. If you took the full
Yeah.
slice of their 3/4, 4
Yeah.
quarters, you
um yeah, mine I still haven't locked mine in, to be honest. I'm still thinking a lot. But mine are largely the same.
yeah,
I have got Stingle at 2 with and Myers at 1. Oh, sorry, the opposite. Like, yeah, 3 votes for Myers, 2 votes for Stengel.
yeah,
And my 1, I was still kind of floating around it a little bit. And I think I'm going to give my 1 to Mullen. I still reserve the right to use my 1 vote in symbolic ways. It doesn't have to be the third most impactful
sure.
player on the ground, in my opinion. And yeah, I thought he was starting to show signs again, and to go at 92.3% disposal efficiency when you know the rest of our team could barely manage to crack 50 uh, was
Yeah,
was pretty good. Obviously, only off 13 disposals, but laid 4 tackles,
still.
got a clearance, 354 meters gained. Yeah, I thought he really started to look like a player that could be out there. Like, you add a few more numbers to those stats, and he's almost at the sort of the expected level for him to get consistent games, I thought. And he just looked very like that kick, like the kick, and sometimes when he would lay a hand pass and run around for the 1-2, his sort of confidence and his dash was really good.
Mm.
Could have given love to Mac Holmes, but he got over 30%, 30 disposals, so he lost us the game. So he can't get any votes.
Cost us the win.
Yeah. As we've said, drop him. He's the one player that we can drop.
Yeah.
I also
One
thought
thing I'd
Dempsey.
just say, sorry, you go.
No, I was gonna say Dempsey and Conway also, but we're gonna talk about those newbies behind the curtain.
Mm. Yeah, just to finish, O'Sheen Mullen, 18 pressure act, 16 of them in the defensive half, and that was second only to Tom Atkins, who had 22 pressure acts in the back half. I don't know how I feel about this thing where Atkins gets pushed to the back 50 when we've got Bruin and Parfitt in the side, and Clark. I don't know. It's fine. I'm
Yeah.
glad he's
Well,
prepared to do whatever for the team. But
especially when you're up against it and you feel like you need some level heads, not to question anybody, but I thought, um, yeah, I thought they should have moved. They could have moved some stuff around, and I think Holmes going a bit, pushing up a bit, and also Atkins. I always say up, meaning towards out, because that's in soccer terms. It's down is
mm,
your back line and up, but it's the opposite, isn't it? In
I think it
football,
is in footy. I think
when
we're saying it wrong all the
they say
time.
push them up, and they generally mean they've dropped them into defense. Um,
Why are you even watching our YouTube channel? We don't even know what we're talking about.
yeah, exactly. We
But
should
you
go and
already
talk.
knew
We
that.
should go and talk about soccer. We know. um, so yeah, Tanner Bruin. Like I sort of pegged him to have a bit of a cracker to come back in after and
Mm,
really kind of. And I don't want to say it and sound like a disappointed parental figure, or say it in terms of like I'm a fan and he owes me something. I'm not I'm not like aggressively disappointed. I'm just
mm,
disappointed in that I really thought he had a, not only did he not come out with all guns blazing, but I thought it was one of his quieter games of the year that he looked um a little bit cast adrift, like he was. And
mm,
I think it was John when I was watching the game that I said it to. I was like, Bruin's work rate is really high here. He's covering a lot of ground, and every time you see the ball, every time the camera has sort of
mm,
at a medium close up, he's on screen and he's running and his hair is flying, but he's nowhere
mm.
near being effective.
Yeah.
Like he was playing. So I'm not questioning his work rate or effort. Um, but
Mm,
the amount of times you could see him just running full speed about 7 paces
yeah.
behind the player. Um,
Mm,
yeah. So in that scenario, I think change some stuff around, and I think Atkins going, pushing into the middle more. Yeah, I think he's at home up there. And yeah,
mm,
I agree. Basically,
yeah.
we've ballooned
I
out
feel like
again.
Atkins most
We're over there.
yeah, Atkins' most valuable skill. See ball, attack ball, get ball out to someone who can use it. I
Yeah.
don't know if yeah, anyway. Lots to think about. We've got a few more days off before the next game. It's a long break. Obviously, this one coming out a little bit early too. So that's it. We're going to go behind the Patreon curtain now. We're going to talk all about some of the young cats who are part of the side this year. And look, maybe we'll include some of the mature age
In-
kind of recruits like O'Sheen, etc. Hey,
Nothing. Nothing. All
okay.
good.
So yeah, if you want to have a look at that part of the show, go on over and sign up for a 7-day free trial on the Hoops Crew Patreon. That's all from us here. We appreciate you watching. Make sure you hit subscribe. Make sure you hit the like button. Give us a 5-star rating or review if you're listening on a podcast app that you can do that on. We'd appreciate it. But until next time, go Cats.
Go Cats.